There's a sound a man never forgets. The low growl of twin engines waking up before sunrise, the smell of coffee in a steel cup, the slap of calm water against a hull that hasn't moved yet. If you grew up on the water, you know it. And if your father took you out on a Bertram, then you knew something else too. You knew you were safe. Because when the weather turned mean and every other boat ran for the dock, the Bertram just lowered its shoulder and kept going. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. It starts the way every great American story starts, with a man who didn't have much, except a feeling that he was right. His name was Dick Bertram, a boy from New Jersey who got his first little boat when he was 8 years old, and never really came back to shore after that. He grew up to sell yachts to kings and shipping tycoons, men with more money than most of us will ever see. But that's not the part that mattered to him. What mattered was the water. And one afternoon, off the coast of Rhode Island, the water showed him something that changed his whole life. It was rough that day, the kind of chop that sends grown men below deck. And out in all of it, there was this small boat, this little 23-footer, just dancing, not pounding, not fighting, dancing. While everything around it slammed and shuddered, this one boat carved through the waves like the sea had opened a door just for her. Dick stood there and felt his heart speed up. He had to know who built her. And that question led him to a quiet designer named Ray Hunt, and to an idea that everyone else in boating had somehow missed. A hull shaped like a blade, sharp all the way through, all the way to the back, so it could split the ocean instead of bouncing on top of it. They called it the Deep V. Dick didn't write a business plan. He built a boat, wood by hand, and he named her Moppie after his wife. And then he did something a sensible man would never do. He entered her in the Miami-to-Nassau race, 172 miles of open ocean, and the morning of the race, the sea was furious. 8-foot waves, 30 knots of wind, the kind of day they almost call off. One by one, the other boats broke down, turned back, or limped home beaten. And Moppie ran. She ran through all of it, and she crossed the finish line more than 2 hours ahead of anyone else. 2 hours on the open sea, that isn't winning. That's a different species. There's a name most people leave out of this story, and it's a shame, because Dick never would have. His partner in those early races was a man named Sam Griffith, a war hero, a pilot who came home from the worst of it with a chest full of medals he never bragged about, and who loved the open water the way Dick did, the way some men love a thing they almost lost. For years it was the two of them, Sam at the wheel and Dick reading the sea, winning the roughest races on the calendar together. Sam was there for the early triumphs. He raced those first boats right alongside Dick, felt the Deep V prove itself under his own hands, and then, in 1963, he was gone. The next time Dick crossed a finish line, he did it himself, at the wheel, in a boat he named for the friend who wasn't in the seat beside him anymore. You can bet that one didn't feel like a victory. That's the kind of man built this company, not a businessman chasing a market, a man who kept faith with the people he loved, on the water, where it counted. And here's the thing you have to understand. People didn't just admire that boat, they wanted to feel what Dick felt. That safety, that trust. The idea that you could take your family out past the inlet, past the point where you can see land, and you'd come home, every one of them. So when Dick built a fiberglass version and called it the Bertram 31, the orders didn't trickle in, they poured. From a rented warehouse in Florida, a legend started rolling out the doors, one hull at a time. If you ever stood on the dock and watched a 31 come in, you remember it. That bow, lifting and falling, throwing spray out to the sides so the man at the wheel stayed dry. Charter captains swore by her. Some of them said she actually called the fish up, that the sound of her hull through the water brought them right to the lines. Nearly 2,000 of those boats were built. Fathers bought them. Then their sons bought them used and fixed them up on weekends with a beer in one hand and a sanding block in the other, and took their own kids out on the same deck where they'd learned to fish. The same scratches in the gel coat, the same spot on the gunnel worn smooth by a grandfather's hand. That's not a product, that's an inheritance. There are men watching this right now who can still close their eyes and feel that deck under their feet. By the time the world caught on, Dick Bertram was a household name. Time magazine called him the Enzo Ferrari of the sea. His company grew into one of the biggest boat builders on the entire planet, and the boats grew with it. 28-footers, 46s, the big 54s that could cross to the islands in comfort. There was even a friendly war out on the water, Bertram against Hatteras, two proud names trading wins at a fishing tournament every season, each one daring the other to build something better. If you followed it back then, you picked a side and you defended it like family. It was a good time to love boats in America. The factories were full. The men inside them had calloused hands and straight backs, and they slept fine at night because they were building something that lasted. And out on the water, a Bertram still meant the same thing it always had. You're going to make it home. But I want to stop here, because this is the part nobody likes to tell you. Bertram didn't lose because the boats got bad. Bertram didn't lose because people stopped loving the water. Bertram lost because of a piece of paper signed in Washington by men who had never spent a cold morning on a boat ramp in their lives. It was 1990. Somebody in Congress had a clever idea. Let's tax the rich. Let's put a special 10% tax on every fancy boat over $100,000, and the millionaires will pay their fair share. It sounded good in a speech. It sounded good right before an election. And the morning it took effect, the first day of 1991, the boat business in this country simply stopped. Almost overnight, sales of those boats fell by more than half. The rich didn't pay the tax, they just didn't buy. Or they bought their boats overseas, where Washington couldn't touch them. They kept their money, and they kept their old yachts, and they barely felt a thing. But somebody felt it. Oh, somebody felt it. Picture the man on the factory floor, not the owner, the worker, the one who laid the fiberglass with his own two hands, who had been doing it for 20 years, who took pride in every hull because he knew a family was going to trust their lives to it. He didn't make $100,000, he made a living. He had a mortgage and a kid in school and a truck that needed tires. He'd shake your hand on a Friday and tell you which hull on the line was his, and one day he came to work and there was no work. Not for him, not for the man next to him, not for the man next to him. The line went quiet. The radios went off. Men who had stood shoulder to shoulder for half their lives shuffled out to the parking lot holding a final check and a box of their own tools, not sure how they were going to tell their wives. Across this whole country, in that 1 year, around 19,000 of those workers lost their jobs. Real men, real families. Also, a politician could say he'd stuck it to the rich. And the cruelest part? The tax didn't even raise the money they promised. After they paid out all the unemployment, after they lost all the income those workers used to pay in, the government actually came out behind. They broke the backs of working men and got nothing for it. By the time they quietly repealed it, the damage was done. You can't unfire a man. You can't unbreak a town. Bertram took the hit like everyone else, and worse than most, that proud company, the one that once filled its yards with 1,200 workers, watched them walk out the doors until barely 30 were left. 30, where there used to be 1,200. The same place that built the boat that beat the sea couldn't keep its own lights on. Think about what that looks like. A building made for an army, with a handful of men rattling around inside it, trying to keep a legend breathing on nothing. And from there, the story gets lonely. The name got bought and sold and bought again, passed around boardrooms like a thing on a shelf. It crossed an ocean and ended up in the hands of an Italian company, and then through them, partly owned from as far away as China. The all-American boat, the one your father trusted, the one with the eagle on the side, was being signed over by people who had never once heard those engines start at dawn. They owned the name. They never owned what it meant. You can't buy that. It was never for sale. And in the spring of 2000, the man who started it all, Dick Bertram, passed away at 84. He lived long enough to see the empire built and long enough to watch most of it slip away. I think about that sometimes. A man who looked at an angry sea and said, "I can beat that." And he did. He beat the ocean. He just couldn't beat a tax form. Now, if you're feeling that lump in your throat, hold on, because it's not all sorrow. The name didn't die. Years later, new owners brought Bertram back to Florida, to a yard on the water in Tampa, and they started building again. They built a boat called the 35, shaped to remind you of that very first 31, the one named after a man's wife all those years ago. They are still out there, building Bertrams in America, by hand, the way it was always supposed to be done. Smaller now, quieter now, not the giant it once was, but alive. And maybe that's the part worth holding on to. Empires fall, factories close, politicians come and go and rarely pay for what they break. But that feeling, that sunrise feeling of stepping onto a deck you trust with the people you love, sliding past the inlet into open water, and knowing you'll all come home, that doesn't die. You felt it. Maybe your father gave it to you. Maybe you gave it to your kids. And every time a Bertram bow rises up and splits a wave, it had no business splitting. Dick Bertram is still out there, somewhere, 2 hours ahead of the whole field. So tell me, did you ever ride on one? Did your father? If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe so the next one finds you when it's ready.